I want to begin by thanking Ms. Hutchinson for her testimony today. We are all in her debt. Our nation is preserved by those who abide by their oaths to our Constitution. Our nation is preserved by those who know the fundamental difference between right and wrong. And I want all Americans to know that what Ms. Hutchinson has done today is not easy.
That was former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney back in 2022 commending former Trump White House aide Cassidy Hutchinson for her decision to testify publicly about the January 6th insurrection. Last month, Cheney, who is still a Republican, endorsed Kamala Harris in the 2024 race for the White House. And on MSNBC last night, Hutchinson joined the former Congresswoman in announcing her own plans to vote for Harris next month. And Cassidy Hutchinson joins us now. Her New York Times bestselling memoir entitled Enough is out now in paperback. It's great to have you back on the show, Cassidy, and definitely want to talk to you about your decision. But first, I'm so curious about the process that some Republican leaders are going through right now mentally, and I mean that in all seriousness, because apparently it is still, Donald Trump is still not enough, to borrow your title, for a lot of Republicans. Can you help us understand why Republicans like you and Liz Cheney seem so few and far between at a time when things appear to be pretty extreme circumstances for this country?
Well, thank you for having me back on your show and the opportunity to be here with you all today. In short, I wish that I had a straightforward answer to your question, because it's something that perplexes me frequently. I don't know why so many Republicans, specifically the men, are still cloaking themselves in cowardice, especially in the face of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. The Republican Party is something that is completely unrecognizable from what it once was. But we do have faith in our leaders like Liz Cheney, who has stepped forward, and Adam Kinzinger. There are still good Republicans out there who are trying to salvage what's left of the party, but we need more people to step forward. We need more people like Mitt Romney, who would be willing to make a decision to endorse Vice President Harris for the presidency. This is a moment that is so much bigger than a political party and our allegiance to a political party, which led to my decision, which wasn't really even a decision once I had thought about it pragmatically, about to endorse now Vice President Harris, but once Mr. Biden as well, who also displayed remarkable leadership in passing the torch to the next generation of leadership, which is something that the Republican Party also cannot do. So I'm really grateful for the leadership of Liz Cheney and people like her, of Nancy Pelosi. And I have a lot of faith in the future of our country, but we do need to do more in order to come back from the current state of politics that we're in.
Cassidy, what would you say to fellow Republicans who might fear that in endorsing Kamala Harris, or even in speaking out against Donald Trump, they were going to lose what made them a Republican in the first place, lose their conservative values? Have you found during this process that your sense of being a conservative has diminished somehow, or do you still see yourself as a conservative even though you're supporting Kamala Harris?
I appreciate the question. I'll be honest, there was a period I went through where I wasn't necessarily questioning my belief system, but I was questioning whether or not I could still call myself a conservative, because I had been a very loyal supporter of Donald Trump. I had worked for him very loyally, and I made this big dramatic split from what I call Trump world. So I was kind of struggling with it, whether or not it was authentic to call myself a conservative. But as time has passed and I've gained clarity of mind, I've realized that not only am I still a conservative, but I feel more confident and rooted in my conservative principles today than I did when I worked for him. Not only because he, in my view, doesn't represent what the Republican Party and the conservative agenda should stand for, but because he has warped it in his image, and he has warped it in his image with a body of enablers that also exist in Congress, who continue to proliferate lies and conspiracy theories to the American people.
Cassidy, You're a young, intelligent woman who a few years ago was working just a few feet from the epicenter of American power, the Oval Office. You saw the president quite often. You saw the people around the president quite often. And then Trump exploded and everything exploded around him. How did it change your life?
It changed my life in more ways than I can adequately describe. I suppose, in short, at the time, and this is the benefit of hindsight and to be able to reflect, I hadn't realized at the time how quickly I had turned from critical thought to just complete cognitive dissonance. I really believed in Donald Trump. I believed that he was the right person for our country. I didn't believe in every single one of his policies. I knew that he had a temper, but I believed that he was authentic in his care for the American people. The shift between believing that wholeheartedly and seeing how quickly he devolved into madness and complete chaos, to assuage his injured pride, how willing he was to throw people under the bus and completely throw away any principles that he had in pursuit of power. That's not what leadership is. So I think looking at all of this, out of all the lessons that this has taught me, it's taught me that we are stronger when we are united, that we are stronger when we're not looking at our nation as an us versus them mindset, as Donald Trump likes to propagate. He does that because he thrives on fear, and he needs the fear and control in order to keep people in his realm and supporting him. But a divided nation cannot stand, and that's why I'm grateful to leaders like Liz Cheney, who have not only stepped forward, but showed us that in the face of political cowardice, it's possible to do the right thing, even when it's the hard thing to do.
Cassidy, good morning. It's good to see you. I want to remind people, because so much gets washed away in the flood of news every day, that on January 6th, you were 24 years old. And as we learned from that House Select Committee and all the testimony and everything we've read about this, you were at many points the only adult in the room. You were the one speaking truth to power, and I'm sure that was not an easy thing to do for somebody a couple of years out of college. So you should be commended for that, first of all. And I'm curious now, as you step out and say, as a Republican, you're going to vote like Liz Cheney for Kamala Harris, what your message would be to other Republicans, let's call them Nikki Haley Republicans, who maybe live in the suburbs and they're tired of Donald Trump and they don't love Donald Trump and they don't like the chaos he brings, but they can't maybe bring themselves to vote for Kamala Harris, who they see as too liberal. They can't vote for a Democrat. What would you say to them who are either saying, I'm not going to participate, or I'm just going to say, what the heck, I'll vote for the Republican anyway? What would be your message to them?
In normal times, I think possibly it's okay not to vote. I would never advocate not to vote. I think that civic engagement is extremely important, and that's what our nation thrives on. But we are not living in normal times. The reality of this election is that it's going to come down to likely a couple thousand votes in a couple of states. Everybody needs to cast a vote this election. We saw what almost happened in 2020 when Donald Trump tried to hold onto power for himself, when he did not win the election, when Joe Biden won the election fairly. So when I think about messaging to these Republicans, as much as I want to tell them to vote for Kamala Harris, from my position, I don't feel comfortable ever telling people how to vote. I know that it is a very intimate and personal decision, and there's a lot that goes into making that decision. But what I will say is I care about issues like inflation, and I would anticipate that there are probably few issues that Kamala Harris and I do see eye to eye on. But I recognize that she is a leader that I admire, that stands in principle, that wants to hold people accountable, and that is somebody that is honorable and will cherish our nation and protect our Constitution and our republic, which is something that J.D. Vance and Donald Trump not only have committed to not being able to do, but have showed that they will not sustain our nation if they win in these next 4 years.
I mean, I guess the hope is that the potential, Cassidy, for the Republican Party to be the party that it once was would be to move Donald Trump off, the stage and to perhaps have a Harris presidency, but then maybe the Republican Party can rebuild. You mentioned, Willie mentioned Nikki Haley, and you mentioned Mitt Romney. Who else could move the meter? You've interacted with these Republican leaders and who they respond to. Is there a high-ranking Republican that you really wish would step up for the country right now?
There are many high-ranking Republicans that I wish would step up. But overall, Micah, I believe that all of us, whether you are a current public servant, whether you know Donald Trump, worked for Donald Trump, have been in his orbit before, I believe all of us have an obligation to the American people to tell the American people who he is and what he is capable of. We've heard for almost 10 years now who he is. He has told us who he is. But in these next, I believe, 4 to 5 weeks, we need more people that are willing to step up and speak truth to power. I understand that it can be frightening. He does create an environment where it's more comfortable to be silent. That's what he likes. He does not want people speaking out against him because that threatens his power. But the only way that we can get through this moment is if we defeat the fear that he has instilled in our society and in our people. And the American people can only vote for the candidate that they believe is on the ballot. It's our job, and it's imperative for us to educate the voter through our experiences, through our view of public service and how we can come through this moment. And I do believe that we can come back from this. What the Republican Party looks like in a post-Trump era is to be determined. But I do believe strongly that the first step is defeating Donald Trump at the ballot box this November. And that also means focusing on Congress. He has filled Congress with primarily a body of enablers that are willing to enact anything that he would want to do, and he has already promised a second term based on retribution. So as important as it is to keep Donald Trump out of the Oval Office, we need to make sure that we're also looking at Congress to make sure that the Republican Party is defeated there as well.
Former White House aide Cassidy Hutchinson, thank you so much for coming on the show this morning. Her best-selling memoir, Enough, is available now in paperback. Cassidy, thank you.